The core patent for his gene breeding breakthrough was stolen by his fiancée's family. His mentor was forced to burn his life's research manuscripts in public. Kneeling in the pouring rain outside the administration building, the last thing he heard was, "Your hands will never touch another seed for the rest of your life." The autumn rain in Jiangbei province had been drizzling for an entire week with no sign of stopping. Chu Huaiqin pushed a rusty, chain-slipping old bicycle through the ancient city gate arch. Strapped to the rear rack was a bulging woven plastic sack stuffed with several wilted, drooping vegetable seedlings. He wore a faded navy blue work jacket, its cuffs frayed, a slightly darker patch sewn over the right shoulder. His pant legs were splattered with mud, and the canvas sneakers on his feet had split at the toe, held together by a thin twist of black wire. He rented a 300 yuan a month single room in the shantytown on the south side of the city. The asbestos roof panel had a crack in it, and on rainy days he had to catch the drips with a wash basin. The water drops hit the enamel basin with a rhythmic plink plink plink. He had slept to that sound for 3 full months. He was used to it now. The room held only a plank bed, a folding table and a coal briquette stove. In the corner sat dozens of nursery pots filled with tomato seedlings. He had taken the seeds from rotting tomatoes scavenged at the wet market, germinating them in the residual warmth of the coal stove. The seedlings were spindly and weak, their stems as thin as matchsticks, but every single one was alive, their leaves glowing a faint green under the dim bulb. He crouched down and gently nudged a leaf with his finger. The veins showed clearly in the lamplight, like a miniature map. 3 months ago, his hands had held a very different batch of seeds. They were the core parent seeds of the Chujing No. 1 super hybrid rice, a line he had spent 6 full years selecting and breeding. From the terrace fields of the southwestern mountains to the southern breeding bases in Hainan, he had chased the seasons, planting in Jiangbei in the spring, doing an extra generation in Hainan over the winter, cramming 2 years of work into one. He had compressed 6 years of breeding into 12 growing seasons of data. That seed line had broken single-yield records in 3 provinces in the National High-Yield Rice Competition, and had been hailed by the judging committee for the Yuan Longping Agricultural Science and Technology Award as the most promising new Indica japonica hybrid rice line for wide-scale adoption in the last decade. Chu Huaiqin's name was listed first in the breeder column. Next to his name was a handwritten note. The molecular marker-assisted selection of this variety's core parents was completed independently by Chu Huaiqin. His mentor Yuan Zhongkong had added that note personally. Yuan Zhongkong had said, "Xiao Chu, this is your work. It has to be written clearly." 3 months later, no one remembered that name. It was last August, in the academic auditorium of Jiangbei Agricultural University. Chancellor Zhang Foren stood at the podium, holding an open laboratory notebook. Over 3,000 faculty and students sat below. The provincial education department leaders were in the center of the front row. Reporters from over a dozen media outlets crouched in the aisles with their cameras and microphones. Zhang Foren's voice, carrying a carefully rehearsed tone of heartbreak, echoed through the hall. Following an investigation and verification by the university's academic committee, it has been determined that Chu Huaiqin, a doctoral candidate in our College of Agriculture, engaged in systematic data fraud during the breeding of the Chujing No. 1 super hybrid rice. The core parental pedigree records he submitted are grossly inconsistent with actual field planting data, and key yield figures were fabricated. The University Party Committee and Academic Committee have jointly decided. He paused, his eyes sweeping over the audience. Chu Huaiqin stood in the very back row, arms at his sides, his fingernails digging 4 deep red crescents into his palms. The people standing near him reflexively edged half a step away, as if he carried something contagious. To revoke Chu Huaiqin's doctoral degree candidacy. To revoke the provincial variety certification for Chujing No. 1. The parent seeds, breeding archives, and all experimental data of this variety shall be transferred to the project's original cooperation partner, Shenong High-Tech Agricultural Group. A round of applause broke out. The man sitting in the center of the front row, in a tailored suit and a faint smile, clapped at a steady, unhurried rhythm, each beat landing solidly. He was Tao Jing'an, chairman of Shenong High-Tech Agricultural Group. Beside him sat a young woman in a white dress, her long hair draped over her shoulders, wearing light makeup, dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue. That was Chu Huaiqin's fiancée, Tao Jing'an's daughter, Tao Zi. Chu Huaiqin moved through the crowd and walked down the aisle. Every eye was on him. Some disdainful, some gloating, some averted, and a very few filled with pity. He reached the front row and stood before Tao Zi. Her gaze drifted over his shoulder to the wall behind him. She didn't look at him. "Zi, we selected those seeds together in the fields. You watched me take every single measurement plant by plant. From the F3 generation to the F7, you were there every growing season. Tell them the data is real." His voice was quiet but steady, so steady that an old professor in the second row removed his glasses, looked down and wiped the lenses. Tao Zi finally lifted her eyes to meet his. Those eyes had once smiled at him in the rice paddies, had handed him water under the 40-degree Hainan sun, had closed in sleep next to him in the lab late at night, still clutching a handful of uncounted seeds. Now those eyes held no smile, no tears, no guilt. There was only a complete, chilling indifference he had never seen before. "Chu Huaiqin, I suggest you face reality. Shenong High-Tech's variety rights application is already published by the Ministry of Agriculture. My father's name is listed as the breeder. You can't even get your diploma. What are you going to fight him with?" She rose from her seat and smoothed her skirt. Her movements were slow and deliberate, as if straightening something that had nothing to do with her. Then she followed Tao Jing'an out of the auditorium. Passing by Chu Huaiqin, she didn't turn her head. She just spoke a single sentence so soft only the two of them could hear. "Don't blame me." When Chu Huaiqin ran out after her, Jiang Furan blocked his path. The corridor outside the auditorium was empty. The reporters who had crowded the aisles had chased after Tao Jing'an and his daughter downstairs. Only a few student council workers remained, taking down the display boards. Jiang Furan pulled a stack of manuscripts from his briefcase. Chu Huaiqin's 6 years of field observation notes, written on the ridges of rice paddies, rained on, soaked with sweat, the pages yellowed and brittle, their edges curled, some riddled with wormholes, some still bearing dried mud splatters. Every page was marked with dates and weather, sketched with records of plant height, tiller counts, and grain numbers. Dense, meticulous, neat. Jiang Furan pulled out a lighter. The flame flickered in the autumn wind, then licked at the corner of the manuscripts. The paper burned fast. The flame spread inward from the edges, page by page turning into charred black butterflies, scattered by the wind, falling onto the terrazzo floor of the corridor, then crushed under his shoe. Chu Huaiqin lunged forward like a madman, but 2 security guards pinned him down. His knees slammed onto the marble steps. Rain poured through the open window, soaking through his pants, freezing and sharp as needles. Jiang Furan tossed the last charred scrap into the rain. He looked down at Chu Huaiqin, kneeling on the steps. His voice was not loud, but every word drove into Chu Huaiqin's bones like a nail. "Chu Huaiqin, your hands will never touch another seed for the rest of your life. Get lost." The iron gate slowly closed in front of him. Chu Huaiqin stayed on his knees. Rainwater streamed down his forehead, blurring his vision. He watched the burned ashes wash away in the rain, flowing down step by step, into the drain, never to be found again. His mother, in their hometown in Bashu, got a call from the university. The voice on the other end said her son had been expelled for academic fraud and might face criminal charges. The old woman, who had high blood pressure, collapsed on the spot and was rushed to the town clinic by a neighbor. When Chu Huaiqin made it back, his mother had just regained consciousness. She was alone in the ward, the 4 drip falling drop by drop, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. She gripped his hand, her lips pale, her voice so weak he could barely hear it. "Jeaner, Mama knows who you are. You've been honest since you were a child. You wouldn't fake anything. Mama believes you." Chu Huaiqin nodded. He didn't cry. He paid off his mother's hospital bill, the last 8,000 yuan in his bank account, exactly enough to cover the deposit. He asked a neighbor aunt to help look after her and called that aunt every day for updates. Then he returned to the provincial capital. He changed his SIM card and deleted every contact in his phone related to Shenong High-Tech and the Tao family. He rented that 300 yuan single room in the Southside shantytown and started hauling sacks at the nearby seed market. Each sack weighed 50 jin, 2 yuan per haul. He hauled 100 sacks a day. The skin on his shoulders broke, scabbed, and broke again. After 2 months, both shoulders were covered in a thick layer of calluses. At night, back in his rented room, he used his blistered, calloused hands to nurse his tomato seedlings in their nursery pots. He disinfected the seeds from the rotten tomatoes with a diluted potassium permanganate solution and used the residual heat of the coal stove to control the germination temperature. Without an incubator, he put a 25-watt incandescent bulb inside a styrofoam box, calibrating the distance with a thermometer over and over until he had locked the temperature within a half-degree margin. When the seedlings emerged, he recorded their height, leaf age, and stem thickness every day, using the same field observation methods as before. The notebook was new, the cheapest softcover kind from the stationery shop at the school gate, but his handwriting was as neat as ever. No one knew him. The people at the market called him the mute, because he barely spoke and just kept his head down and worked. Old Pan, who sold vegetable seeds next to him, once saw him crouching by the roadside, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. He leaned in and saw it was a rice pedigree chart, the arrows and symbols laid out with perfect order. Old Pan squatted there and studied it for a long time. He didn't understand a single thing, but he knew this young man was no ordinary person. From that day on, he brought an extra steamed bun every morning and left it at Chu Huaiqin's door. Chu Huaiqin never said thank you, but every day after work, he would clean the rotten vegetable leaves off Old Pan's stall. No one knew he was the most promising young breeder in the domestic rice breeding world. Even fewer knew that his breeding notes had been registered 2 years earlier, under his own name, with the International Union for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants (UPOV), under the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization (UOV). Those 4 letters, which most domestic breeders saw as a distant and unfamiliar international organization, were something Yuan Zhongkong had drilled into him over and over. Yuan Zhongkong had said one thing: the protection of seed industry intellectual property cannot rely solely on domestic variety certification. The rules of domestic certification can be burned to ash with a lighter by someone like Jiang Furen. But a UPOV filing, that cannot be burned. In the filing documents Chu Huaiqin had submitted to UPOV, the pedigree origins of the Chu Jing No. 1 core parents, the entire selection process, and the complete data for 127 key agronomic traits were recorded in exhaustive detail. From the planting row numbers of the parent nursery to the sowing dates of each generation advance, from field photos at the tillering stage to yield component analysis at harvest, everything was archived. The electronic data file for this set carried a timestamp from the National Time Service Center, predating Tao Jingen's domestic variety rights application by a full 9 months. In other words, in front of that filing, all of Tao Jingen's claims of independent breeding would collapse on their own. The name of the filing entity was not Chu Huaiqin. It was an International Agricultural Intellectual Property Trust under the FAO, the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund. The trustee was Yuan Zhongkong himself. The beneficiary listed was Chu Huaiqin. Yuan Zhongkong, the nephew of academician Yuan Longping, a researcher at the Institute of Crop Sciences of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and one of the earliest experts in rice molecular marker-assisted breeding in the country. Chu Huaiqin had started following Yuan Zhongkong into the fields in his sophomore year, getting his skin peeled off by the sun at the southern breeding base in Hainan more times than he could count. Every winter, when the rice paddies in Jiangbei were buried under snow, they would head south to Hainan, sowing, hybridizing, and selecting plants under the blazing sun. Yuan Zhongkong taught him, hand over hand, how to read the structure of rice flowers, how to use tiny tweezers for emasculation and cross-pollination, how to search plant by plant among thousands for that one dwarf lodging-resistant mutant. Yuan Zhongkong had spent his life pushing for international protection of China's seed industry intellectual property. 5 years ago, he had set up this trust specifically to protect the original achievements of young domestic breeders from being plundered. Chu Huaiqin was the first beneficiary he chose. In his will, Yuan Zhongkong had written, "Chu Huaiqin is the hardest working young man I have ever met, the kind willing to put in the dumb, grueling effort. The revitalization of the seed industry depends on exactly this kind of dumb effort, feet planted in the mud. Leave all my materials to him." Neither Jiang Furen nor Tao Jingen knew this. They thought that after Yuan Zhongkong's death, Chu Huaiqin had lost his last backer in the breeding world. That was why they dared to move against him. What they didn't know was that Yuan Zhongkong, before he died, had already built an unbreachable wall for Chu Huaiqin at the international level. At this moment, the young man who had been utterly erased from the seed industry was crouched in his shantytown room, toasting a cold steamed bun over the dying warmth of his coal stove. He toasted it with the focus of someone conducting a temperature-sensitive experiment. The surface of the bun turned an even golden brown. He broke it open. Steam carrying the scent of wheat bloomed out. He peeled off the scorched crust and instead of throwing it away, crushed it into an enamel bowl and mixed it into the potting soil of his nursery pots. This was a folk method he'd learned from an old vegetable farmer. Carbonized carbohydrates can improve the soil's microbial community and promote seedling root growth. This method wasn't written in any textbook, but that old farmer's family had used it for 3 generations, and it worked better than those expensive microbial inoculants. He sat down at his folding table and opened his old laptop, the one with the crack screen he'd bought for 200 yuan at a second-hand market. It took 3 minutes to boot up, its cooling fan whining like a small airplane about to take off. He entered a 42-character password. The screen jumped to the confirmation page of the UPOV International Plant Variety Rights Filing System. Filing number BUP2022000487. In the variety name field, it read in both Chinese and English, Chujing Yi Hao Chujing number 1. The variety rights status showed accepted, under examination. The progress bar was at 87%, with an estimated completion date of the 15th of next month. He closed the page and opened another encrypted folder. Inside were the application materials for Shanjing number 3, which Taojing and Shenong High-Tech Group had recently submitted to the National Variety Certification Committee. Chu Huaiqin had obtained these materials through a friend in the industry, who worked at the Provincial Seed Administration Station. This friend had collaborated with Yuan Zhongkong on a project years ago, and had been quietly furious about what happened to Chu Huaiqin. When he handed over the materials on a USB drive, he said only 4 words: use them carefully. Chu Huaiqin put the pedigree of Shenjing number 3 and his own UPOV filing data into a single Excel sheet and ran a comparative analysis. He used the dumbest possible method, line-by-line comparison. 127 trait loci, 1 by 1. Plant height to panicle length. Tiller number to 1,000 grain weight. Leaf blast resistance to amylose content. The comparison took 2 full all-nighters. The coal stove went out and was relit over and over. At 4 in the morning on the second night, the comparison results came out. He marked 17 loci in red. Substantially similar. 12 of those loci were rare, unique alleles specific to Chujing number 1, with a probability of occurring randomly in nature of less than 1 in a million. In other words, if Shenjing number 3 were truly an independently bred variety of Shenong High-Tech, its parents could not possibly carry all 12 of these rare alleles simultaneously. The only reasonable explanation was that Shenong High-Tech had simply taken the core parents of Chujing number 1 and slapped a new name on them. Chu Huaiqin stared at those 17 red-marked loci. A faint, almost imperceptible curve flickered at the corner of his mouth. It was so faint that if someone were looking at his face, they might not even notice. But his fingers tapped the mouse twice, to the rhythm of an old song Yuan Zhongkong had always loved to hum. Tao Jing'an had done something incredibly stupid. In his rush to secure the variety certification before Chu Huaiqin, he hadn't even bothered to do a thorough scrub of the parental DNA fingerprint data. Maybe he was in too much of a hurry. Maybe he was too arrogant. Maybe his people got lazy, figuring Chu Huaiqin had already been ground into the mud and could never crawl back out. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. The genetic similarity between the core parents of Shenjing number 3 and the core parents of Chujing number 1 at the DNA molecular marker level was 99.97%. In the face of molecular marker technology, this kind of clumsy name change was no different from blotting out 1 digit on someone else's ID card and trying to pass it off as your own. He picked up his phone and made a call. It rang for a long time before someone picked up. An old but vigorous voice came through, tinged with the irritation of being woken from an afternoon nap. Who is it? Calling at this hour? Professor Chun, it's me. Chu Huaiqin. Silence on the other end. It stretched on so long that Chu Huaiqin thought the line had dropped. He pulled the phone from his ear and checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then the voice came back, much lower than before, as if something were stuck in his throat. Xiao Chu? You're still alive? I thought those bastards had crushed you. I've called you a dozen times in the last 3 months. Not a single one went through. Professor Chun, those rice seeds, do you still have them? Silence again. Longer this time. Chu Huaiqin could hear the sound of rummaging, then a key turning in a lock, then a heavy metal door being pulled open. When Chun Hanchi's voice returned, every word seemed forced through gritted teeth, carrying the stubborn pride of an old breeder. I've kept them. Haven't moved a single grain. I'm past 70, and for the last 3 years I've done nothing else but guard those seeds for you. What your teacher Yuan asked me to do before he left. I could sooner forget my own name than that. Chu Huaiqin's fingers tightened around the phone. Chen Hanqi, a senior researcher at the Institute of Crop Sciences of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, Yuan Zhongkong's old classmate and close friend, one of the earliest experts in rice molecular marker breeding in the country. After Chu Huaiqin's downfall, it was Chen Hanqi who had rushed to the experimental fields at Zhongbei Agricultural University. By the time he arrived, Zhang Foreign's people were already at the edge of the field with a truck, ready to plow under the entire parent nursery of Chujing No. 1 and replace it with Shenong High-Tech's display varieties. Chen Hanqi stood alone on the ridge between the fields, arms spread wide blocking that truck. He was past 70, his hair completely white, his back slightly hunched. But he stood there like an old wooden stake driven deep into the earth. This is Yuan Zhongkong's experimental material. Anyone who touches it breaks the law. That was the only thing he said. The men in the truck looked at each other and didn't dare force their way through. That night, Chen Hanqi removed every core parent seed of Chujing No. 1, panicle by panicle, packing them into labeled craft paper bags, and storing them in the deep-freeze cryogenic vault of the Academy's germplasm repository. No one noticed the white-haired old man working bent over on the field ridge through the entire night. By dawn, the experimental plot was nothing but stubble. Every panicle cut away. Now that batch of seeds was Chu Huaiqin's deadliest weapon, because all he had to do was take the sealed original stock of Chujing No. 1 and the parents of Shenong High-Tech's Shanjing No. 3, put them in the same lab for a single DNA fingerprint comparison, and the result would be ironclad evidence. In the face of molecular biology, no verbal defense could hold. Professor Chun, in a few days I might need you to bring those seeds to the capital, Chu Huaiqin said. The capital? On the 15th of next month, the National Variety Certification Committee is meeting to review Shenong High-Tech's Shanjing No. 3. I need to be there. The voice on the other end didn't ask why. Didn't ask how he would get in. Didn't ask what his plan was. Chen Hanqi just fell silent for another brief moment, and then he laughed. The laugh was like rough sandpaper scraping wood, dry, short, but full of vigor. All right. I've waited all this time just to hear you say that. I'll bring the seeds myself. Portable liquid nitrogen doer. Airline approved. No problem. Chu Huaiqin hung up. Outside the window the rain had stopped. The clouds split open and moonlight streamed through the gap, falling onto the potholed alleyways and reflecting off the puddles like scattered silver. He finished the other half of his cold steamed bun, drank a cup of plain boiled water, and sat back down at the computer. He began preparing all the materials he would need for the capital: the printed UPOV filing confirmation, the comparative analysis report of the 127 trait loci, the preliminary plan for DNA fingerprint testing, and a statement he had spent 3 nights drafting. The title of the statement was 3 words. Seeds can talk. The capital. The National Variety Certification Committee review meeting was set for the 3rd floor conference hall of the China World Hotel. Chu Huaiqin had been to this building once 3 years ago, when he came as an award-winning representative of the National High-Yield Rice Competition. He had worn a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit, and standing on stage he had been so nervous he nearly dropped the trophy. Yuan Zhongkong had sat in the audience clapping, grinning harder than if he had won the award himself. Today, 3 years later, he stood at the entrance of the same building wearing a clean dark gray jacket, a canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. The jacket was something Yuan Zhongkong had left him. He'd worn it for 3 years. The cuffs had worn through and been mended once by the seamstress at the alley's entrance, The stitching fine and even, invisible unless you looked closely. Inside the canvas satchel was a document very thin, just a single page. But that single page carried more weight than all the yield trial data he had collected over the past 6 years combined. It was an electronic printout of the UPOV International Plant Variety Rights filing confirmation, bearing the electronic seal of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. That single page was enough to turn Jiang Foran's revocation of variety certification from 3 months ago into a complete and utter farce. Because under the International Convention for the Protection of New Varieties of Plants, and the commitment signed when the country joined UPOV, variety rights filed with UPOV hold equivalent legal force domestically. In other words, the variety certification Jiang Foran had announced as revoked was never theirs to revoke in the first place. The variety rights did not belong to Zhongbei Agricultural University. They did not belong to Shenong High Tech. They did not belong to any domestic institution. The variety rights belonged to the UPOV-filed Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund. And the sole beneficiary of that fund was named Chu Huaiqin. By the time Chu Huaiqin walked into the hotel lobby, the review meeting had been underway for 40 minutes. The conference hall was packed. The 7 members of the National Variety Certification Committee sat in a row on one side of the long table. Opposite them was the Shenong High-Tech presentation team. Tao Jing'an sat in the center of the presentation bench, personally delivering the variety profile of Shanjing No. 3. His voice, seasoned by decades in the business world, carried through the room with ease and confidence. His PowerPoint reached slide 47, a multi-year, multi-location yield comparison chart of Shanjing No. 3, across 5 ecological zones in the middle and lower Yangtze. The bar graphs were towering, each column visibly higher than the control varieties. Esteemed committee members, as the data shows, the average yield of Shanjing No. 3, across all 5 ecological zones exceeded the control varieties by 12.7%, reaching an extremely significant level. The parental selection and breeding work for this variety was completed independently by the Shenong High-Tech breeding team. The parental pedigree is clear and complete, and it does not involve any third-party intellectual property. He clicked to slide 52. Regarding some baseless accusations against our company that have circulated recently, I would like to make a formal clarification here. The breeder of Chujing No. 1, Chu Huaiqin, is a former doctoral student at Zhongbei Agricultural University who has been expelled by the university for academic fraud. His claims concerning variety rights ownership are pure nonsense. Our company has commissioned our legal team to gather evidence of his defamatory conduct and reserves the right to pursue legal action. A few scattered murmurs of assent rose from the audience. Several Shenong High-Tech employees seated at the back led a round of applause, thin and sporadic, but harsh in the oddly quiet, stagnant air of the conference hall. Seated at the center of the committee bench was Zhou Mingyuan, the chairman of the National Variety Certification Committee. He did not applaud. He just lowered his head and flipped through the materials in front of him, his brow slightly furrowed. He couldn't find the parental pedigree comparison data for Shanjing No. 3, a mandatory item in the variety certification application. The page in Shenong High-Tech's submission was blank, with only a note in the remarks column. See Appendix 3 for parental pedigree. And Appendix 3 had only been submitted as a supplement this morning. Zhou Mingyuan hadn't had time to review it carefully. Just then, the door to the conference hall swung open. Chu Huaiqin walked in. The staff member at the door instinctively raised a hand to block him. Chu Huaiqin pulled the UPOV filing confirmation from his canvas satchel, unfolded it, and held it up before the man's face. The staff member glanced down at it, then looked up at Chu Huaiqin's face. He stepped aside. Every gaze in the room locked onto the young man in the old jacket, his pant legs still bearing traces of unwashed mud. A few people recognized him and gasped. Tao Jing'an's PowerPoint froze on slide 52. His fingers around the laser pointer suddenly clenched, the knuckles going white. The assistant beside him leaned down and whispered in his ear, "Chairman Tao, it's Chu Huaiqin." The voice was very low, but in the suddenly silent conference hall, a few people nearby still heard it. Chu Huaiqin walked down the aisle. His pace was unhurried, each step landing with absolute steadiness. He stopped in front of the committee bench and placed the UPOV filing confirmation on Zhou Mingyuan's desk. Chairman Zhou, I am Chu Huaiqin, the breeder of Chu Jing No. 1. On behalf of the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund, I am submitting a formal objection to the committee regarding the infringement of the Chu Jing No. 1 plant variety rights in Shenong Haiteka's Shanjing No. 3 variety certification application. His voice wasn't loud, but the conference hall's sound system carried every word clearly to every corner of the room. Tao Jing'an stood up, his face pale. Chairman Zhou, this man's identity. Chairman Tao, sit down. Zhou Mingyuan raised a hand without looking at him. He picked up the document and read it through from beginning to end. Then he removed his reading glasses and tapped the temple lightly against the table, silent for a few seconds. He was an old expert who had spent decades in this industry. He knew exactly what weight the letters UPOV carried. He had handled at least 1,000 variety certification applications in his career. Never once had he seen an applicant confronted by the original breeder in the review meeting itself, brandishing a UPOV filing confirmation, because most breeders didn't even know what UPOV was. But Chu Huaiqin did. Zhou Mingyuan passed the document to the committee member on his left. That member finished reading and passed it to the next. The 7 members reviewed it in turn. No one spoke, but the expression on every face deepened with gravity after reading. The filing date of the UPOV registration was 9 months earlier than Shenong Haiteka's domestic variety certification application date. 9 months. That was enough to turn the Shenjing No. 3 application into a massive legal liability. If the certification committee approved Shenjing No. 3, while fully aware of an existing international intellectual property dispute, the entire committee would bear legal responsibility, a responsibility no one there could afford to take on. Chairman Tao, the materials submitted by Chu Huaiqin indicate that the core parents of Chu Jing No. 1 have been registered through UPOV International Variety Rights. This registration date predates your domestic certification application by 9 months. Can your side provide evidence proving that the parental selection process for Shenjing No. 3 is unrelated to Chu Jing No. 1? Zhou Mingyuan's voice remained calm, but every industry insider in the room could hear the weight behind that question. Tao Jing'an opened his mouth about to speak. The door of the conference hall swung open again. Chen Hanqi walked in. His silver hair was combed neatly. He wore a faded gray Zhongshan suit with an old-fashioned fountain pen clipped in his breast pocket. In his hand he carried a portable liquid nitrogen dewar, silver white, with the seal of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences germplasm repository taped across it. He set the dewar on the table in front of the committee bench and opened the lid. White vapor rolled from the mouth of the dewar, spreading across the tabletop before slowly sinking. Inside were rows of numbered seed packets, each labeled in waterproof marker with the variety name, storage date, and sealed stock number. Esteemed committee members, Chen Hanqi's voice was old but resonant, filling the carpeted conference hall with the unquestionable authority forged by decades in the laboratory. I am Chen Hanqi, researcher at the Institute of Crop Sciences, Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences. Today, on behalf of the Academy's germplasm repository, I have brought the sealed original core parent stock of Chu Jing No. 1. This batch of seeds was personally sealed and placed in storage by the late researcher Yuan Zhongkong. The storage date is 3 years ago, at least 2 years prior to the submission date of Shenong Haiteka's Shenjing No. 3 variety certification application. He pulled one of the seed packets from the dewar and held it up so the entire room could see the date and signature on the seal. I now formally petition the National Variety Certification Committee. Conduct a DNA molecular marker comparison between the core parents of Shenjing No. 3 and the sealed original stock of Chu Jing No. 1 at an accredited third-party laboratory. Fully video recorded. The results to be announced on the spot. The air in the conference hall felt vacuumed out. The composure and confidence on Tao Jing'an's face finally began to crack. It crumbled fast, layer by layer, revealing the gray, defeated color beneath. His lips moved, wanting to say this was a trade secret, that the parental materials involved core corporate assets and could not be subjected to open comparison, wanting to find 100 reasons to stop Chen Hanqi from placing those seed packets on the committee's table. But nothing came out, because he knew that any attempt to block a DNA comparison was tantamount to admitting in front of everyone that there was something wrong with his parents. and allowing the comparison would yield the exact same result. It was a road with a dead end at both sides. He looked left, then right, as if searching for someone who could give him a way out. He found no one. His assistant, beneath the table, was frantically typing on his phone. Several replies popped up on the screen. Everyone was bad news. One was from the company's legal director. Chairman Tao, we underestimated the legal weight of the UPOV filing. The risk of pushing back now is too great. One was from the group's PR director. Reporters are already waiting outside the venue. We can't contain this anymore. The last one was from Tao Zi. No text, just a photo. Her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the airport departure hall. A plane taxiing for takeoff behind her. She was already gone. Zhou Mingyuan looked at the row of numbered seed packets, then at the unyielding face of Chen Hanqi. He was silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up and made a decision that had no precedent in his tenure as committee chairman, but was fully in accordance with legal procedure. Given that this case involves a major international intellectual property dispute, I hereby announce that the National Variety Certification Committee immediately suspends the review process for Shinong High-Tech's Shunjing No. 3 Variety Certification application. An accredited third-party laboratory designated by the Academy of Agricultural Sciences, Institute of Crop Sciences, will conduct DNA molecular marker comparison identification of the disputed parental lines from both parties. The identification results will serve as core evidence in the adjudication of this case. He paused, then added the final sentence, deliberately slowing his pace to ensure every word landed clearly in every corner of the room. Until the identification results are released, Shunjing No. 3 may not be commercially promoted in any form. Violators will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Tao Jing'an leaned back in his chair, both hands flat on the table, his fingers curling slightly. The team behind him was dead silent. The same assistant who had used his body to shield him from the cameras in the hallway now kept his head down, his thumb aimlessly swiping across his phone screen. The screen was lit but no app was open. Tao Jing'an stared at the tabletop, at the presentation materials he had spent 3 months meticulously preparing. Slide 52 was still frozen on the screen. The words "does not involve any third-party intellectual property" glared under the projector's harsh light, blindingly stark. Chu Huiqin and Chen Hanqi exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. Chen Hanqi placed the seed packet back into the liquid nitrogen dewar and closed the lid. The white vapor swirled twice at the mouth and dissipated. That afternoon at the Provincial Academy's Molecular Breeding Laboratory, the DNA molecular marker comparison, jointly conducted by 3 independent third-party institutions, officially began. Fully video recorded. 2 members of the National Variety Certification Committee were present to supervise. Shinong High-Tech sent its legal director and an outside attorney. Chu Huiqin and Chen Hanqi were present as witnesses representing the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund and the Academy's Germplasm Repository, respectively. The lab was so quiet that the only sounds were the faint clicks of pipette tips being fitted and the low hum of the PCR machine. The operator took microsamples of DNA from the numbered specimen tubes, added them to a 96-well PCR plate, and loaded it into the machine, setting the program. The real-time quantitative PCR machine began to run, amplification curves appearing one by one on the screen. Each curve represented the genotype of one molecular marker locus. The SSR molecular marker testing went on for nearly 4 hours. Chu Huiqin stood in the corner of the lab the entire time. He didn't sit. He didn't drink water. He didn't look at his phone. His eyes never left the monitor on the wall behind the workstation, the one displaying the real-time amplification curves. It wasn't that he doubted the outcome. He had just waited so long that he had grown used to waiting. Chen Hanqi sat in a chair nearby, holding a cup of hot water a staff member had poured for him. The water went from scalding to warm, from warm to cold. He didn't take a single sip. At 7:15 p.m., the last set of data emerged from the high-throughput genetic analyzer. The printer started up, its buzzing oddly loud in the silent lab. The report pages came out one by one. The operator bound them into a booklet and handed it to the heads of the 3 independent testing agencies, who signed and stamped it in turn. Finally, the signed test report was placed in the hands of the certification committee's supervising member. The member looked at one page, then flipped to the conclusion page and read it. His face showed no extra emotion. He simply placed the report on the table and read it aloud in a steady official tone. The SSR molecular marker test results show the core parents of Shen Jing number 3 and the sealed original stock of Chu Jing number 1 are completely identical across all 17 tested loci. Genetic similarity is 99.97%. The probability of excluding homologous variety status is 0. The air in the lab froze for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Chu Huaiqin heard his own heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. Then the sound of Chen Hanqi setting his cup of cold water on the table, the porcelain clinking softly against the glass top. Then the sound of Shenong High-Tech's legal director pocketing his phone, standing, and straightening his suit jacket. He said nothing. He gave a slight nod to everyone present and walked toward the door. Chu Huaiqin walked to the lab's floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the academy's experimental fields were bathed in the golden-red light of the early winter sunset. The rice had already been harvested, the fields now flooded with water, reflecting the brilliant evening clouds on the horizon. He pulled out his phone and called his mother, still in their hometown in Bashu. The old woman picked up quickly. Her voice was much stronger than it had been 3 months ago, full of energy. "Jeaner, what is it?" Chu Huaiqin leaned against the glass window, and a smile finally flickered at the corner of his mouth. It was his first smile in 3 months. Not a smile of relief. Not a smile of triumph. A faint, quiet smile like winter afternoon sunlight falling on an old cotton quilt. "Ma, the rice is ripe. I'll come home and harvest it in a few days." 3 days later, the National Variety Certification Committee issued a formal public notice. The announcement was concise and carried not a single superfluous word. The variety certification application for Shenong High-Tech Agricultural Group's Shenjing number 3 was cancelled. The provincial variety certification for the Chujing number 1 superhybrid rice was reinstated. In the breeder column of the newly approved certification, the name read, Chu Huaiqin. That same day, the Seed Industry Management Division of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs published an independent notice on its official website, announcing an immediate special investigation into Shenong High-Tech Agricultural Group for suspected infringement of another party's plant variety rights. The wording was official and restrained, but the shock it sent through the seed industry was no less than an earthquake. It was the first variety rights infringement investigation in the history of the domestic seed industry triggered by an international UPOV filing. At Shenong High-Tech's headquarters, the lights in Tao Jingen's office stayed on until dawn. The parking lot below was packed with media vans. Security had set up a cordon, blocking all reporters from entering the premises. Shenong High-Tech's stock price in Hong Kong fell by 52% over 3 trading days, wiping out over 40 billion Hong Kong dollars in market value. Jiangbei Agricultural University, the administration building, the chancellor's office. Zhang Foran had been sitting in his office all morning. 2 documents lay spread on the desk before him. The first was an official notice issued by the Provincial Education Department the previous day. Circular of criticism regarding Jiangbei Agricultural University's violations in the certification process of Chujing number 1. The language was severe, naming Zhang Foran directly, determining that he had made the decision to revoke the variety certification without verifying the true ownership of the variety rights, causing serious harm to the breeder's legal rights. The second document was one he had drafted himself this morning. He had written it 3 times and torn it up twice. The final version's handwriting was slightly crooked, but every character was penned with force. The document's heading was, Letter of Resignation. The last line read, I, Zhang Foran, due to personal reasons, apply to resign from the position of Chancellor of Jiangbei Agricultural University. He set his pen down on the desk, stood and walked to the window. Outside, the ginkgo leaves were falling fast, blanketing the steps in front of the administration building. Steps he had walked for 20 years. The autumn wind swirled the fallen leaves into layers, spinning them into the air. He looked down at those steps. It was on the lowest of those steps 3 months ago, in front of the entire university, that he had burned 6 years of a young man's life's work. At the time, he had thought he'd handled it cleanly and decisively. Now he knew. Every single ash of what he had burned had landed at his own feet. He picked up the phone and dialed Chu Huaiqin's number. He had his secretary pull it from the university's archive system. Although Chu Huaiqin's student status had been revoked, his file was still there. He dialed 3 times. Each time he heard the same recorded message. The number you have dialed is busy. Please try again later. He knew he had been blocked. The next morning, mist still hung in the ancient city gate arch. The air mixed the smells of coal stoves and dew. The breakfast stall owner was lifting the lid off her steamer, billowing white steam obscuring her face. Chu Huaiqin climbed onto his old bicycle with the rusty chain. Strapped to the rear rack, the woven plastic sack no longer held wilted vegetable seedlings. Instead, it held the backup stock of the Chu Jing No. 1 core parent seeds he had retrieved from the Provincial Academy's seed bank. 37 varieties in total, each packed in its own craft paper bag, marked with a marker pen. Variety number, generation, and storage date. He secured the sack firmly with a bungee cord and pushed the bike through the old city gate arch. He parked the bike at the entrance of the alley, walked into that 300 yuan a month rented room, and began packing his things. He had lived here for 3 months. All his belongings only filled half a woven sack. A few changes of clothes, an enamel rice bowl, a spare pair of canvas shoes, the laptop with the cracked screen, and the several breeding notebooks Yuan Zhongkong had left him. In the corner, the tomato seedlings in the dozens of nursery pots had already set green fruit, the size of a thumb, their skins covered in a fine white fuzz. He carefully wrapped the root ball of each seedling in newspaper, packed them into a styrofoam box he had picked up at the wet market, and taped it shut, intending to keep growing them at Chun Hanchi's experimental station. Old Pan was crouched at his doorway next door, smoking. He watched Chu Huaiqin bustling in and out. After finishing 2 cigarettes, Old Pan stood up, crushed the butt under his heel, and dusted off his hands. He walked over and pulled a plastic bag from his pocket, pressing it into Chu Huaiqin's hand. Inside were seeds, dark brown, irregularly shaped. This is a landrace chive my family's been growing for decades back home. You can't buy it anywhere. Take it. Your tomato seedlings are doing well, so help me plant these 2. Old variety. By my generation it's been passed down 4 times. If you don't help me save the seed, it dies with me. His tone was casual, as if it were a trivial matter, but the way he handed over the bag was solemn, using both hands, as if what was inside were not a few dozen chive seeds but the entire memory of his family's hillside. Chu Huaiqin took the plastic bag and looked down at the dark brown seeds. They were tiny, weightless, but resting in his palm they felt solid and grounding. He carefully placed the bag into the inner pocket of his canvas satchel and zipped it shut. Then he clapped Old Pan on the shoulder. That hand had hauled goods at the seed market for 100 days, its palm covered in calluses, but the force it landed on Old Pan's shoulder was very gentle. A delivery van was parked at the end of the alley. Chu Huaiqin loaded the woven sack, the styrofoam box, and the bag of chive seeds Old Pan had given him into the van. As the engine started, the first snow of early winter began to fall. Very light, very soft, melting into water droplets the moment it touched the window, sliding down the glass and leaving thin, trailing streaks. Through the window, he took one last look at the rented room with the cracked asbestos roof. The crack in the roof was filled now with snow like a white scar. 1 month later, the Zhongbei Province Seed Industry Science and Technology Innovation Forum was held in the largest banquet hall of the Provincial Convention Center. It was the largest annual gathering in the domestic seed industry, attended by R&D heads from every major seed company, department chairs from agricultural universities, and relevant officials from the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and the Ministry of Science and Technology. The theme of this year's forum was Seed Industry Revitalization and Intellectual Property Protection. This theme had been decided by the Seed Industry Management Division 2 months earlier. At the time, no one thought it was anything special. Seed industry IP protection had been talked about for years, always the same old rhetoric. It wasn't until Chu Huaiqin's case spread through the industry that they understood. The theme had been tailor-made for one man. Tao Jing'an sat in the second row of the VIP section, in a sharply tailored suit. He was one of the sponsors of this year's forum. Specifically, he had signed the sponsorship contract 3 months ago. When the forum's theme hadn't yet been set, and Shinong High-Tech's PR department simply wanted to leverage the event for brand exposure. Now that sponsorship contract had become the hottest potato in Tao Jingen's hands. Pulling the sponsorship meant paying a penalty. Not pulling it meant sitting in the VIP section where everyone could see him. His seat was arranged in the second row on the right, near the aisle. The organizers had specifically kept a seat for him, but the title on his nameplate had been changed from Chairman, Shinong High-Tech, to Representative, Shinong High-Tech. One word changed and everything changed. He was not scheduled to appear on stage for any segment today. His speech had been removed from the agenda by the organizers 3 days earlier with no explanation, just a brief email. Due to agenda adjustments, your speaking slot has been cancelled. Thank you for your support. He couldn't even afford not to show up. If he didn't come, Shinong High-Tech's stock price would take another dive. If he did come, he had to sit in the VIP section and face everyone with a dignified smile. It was a public humiliation, and he was the only person present utterly unable to express any displeasure. Chu Huiqin stood backstage, wearing a simple white dress shirt. It had been Yuan Zhongkong's. The collar was slightly yellowed, but it was pressed smooth. The cuff buttons had been sewn on by Chan Hanqi's wife. One of the original buttons had been lost, and the old couple had rummaged through their entire sewing box to find one that was the closest match. Pinned to the shirt's breast pocket was an insignia, a hexagon surrounded by rice panicles, with an archaic character for Yuan carved in the center. This was the emblem of the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund, which Yuan Zhongkong had personally designed. The badge was gilt bronze, its edges slightly worn. On the back was engraved a line of small text. The revitalization of the seed industry does not require that the credit be mine. Chu Huiqin had never worn it before. Today, for the first time, he pinned it over his heart. The moderator stood at the podium, glanced down at the cue card, then looked up. Distinguished guests, we now proceed to the fourth item on our forum agenda, the invited keynote address. The speaker, the plenipotentiary representative of the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund, UPOV International Plant Variety Rights Registrant, former doctoral candidate of the College of Agriculture, Zhongbei Agricultural University, Chu Huiqin. The title of his address, From Chujing No. 1 to Seed Industry IP Protection, One Young Breeder's Journey to Defend His Rights. Applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, sparse few claps and it's over kind. It built from the front rows to the back, sustained, rhythmic, lasting nearly 20 seconds. Many in the audience were senior figures in the seed industry, people who had spent decades in this world and had seen too many young breeders crushed by corporate infringement. Most had silently swallowed their grievances, changed research topics, left the field, and never returned to the land. Chu Huiqin's name had been circulating for 3 months. The UPOV filing, the DNA molecular marker comparison, the on-the-spot suspension of the certification review, every single thing told everyone that this young man was not asking for justice. He was taking it into his own hands. Chu Huiqin walked to the podium and bowed to the entire hall. The stage lights hit his white shirt, and the gilt bronze badge on his chest threw off tiny flecks of golden light. He picked up the microphone. His voice, carried through the sound system, filled the banquet hall, and his very first sentence silenced every murmur. Esteemed teachers, esteemed colleagues, my presentation today is in 3 parts. Part 1, the origin of a single seed. Part 2, the full evidence chain of an infringement case. Part 3, is a document I received just this morning. The room fell silent. Several old experts in the front row unconsciously sat up straighter. In the second row, Tao Jingen leaned forward slightly, his hands folded over his knees, his knuckles white. Chu Huiqin held up the document and projected it onto the giant screen behind him. It was a formal certification letter from the National Variety Certification Committee, an official red header document. The reference number, the official seal, the date, all crystal clear. The body of the letter was only 2 paragraphs, but every word hit the air of the hall with crushing weight. Following re-examination by the National Variety Certification Committee, the Chujing No. 1 Super Hybrid Rice has passed National Variety Certification. Certification number NSR 202400001. Breeder Chu Huiqin. Variety rights holder, the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund. This certification takes effect on the date of issuance. The previous provincial variety certification is simultaneously reinstated. The hall was silent for 1 second. Just one. Then came an avalanche of applause. The old experts in the front row stood and clapped. Then the second row. The third. The fourth. The entire banquet hall rose to its feet. The applause surged toward the podium in waves, toward the young man in the old white shirt with the gilt bronze badge pinned over his heart. Tao Jing'an did not stand. He leaned back in his chair, his hands sliding from his knees to hang limp at his sides. The expression on his face was a complicated calm, the surrender of a man who had exhausted every fight, still carrying a trace of lingering warmth. He didn't look at the certification letter on the screen. He didn't look at Chu Huaiqin on the stage. He just turned his head slightly and glanced at the empty seat beside him, the seat where Tao Zi was supposed to be. On the seat lay a copy of the forum's program booklet. The back cover was a full-page, full-color ad with the Shenong High-Tech logo, 300,000 yuan for that ad space. The booklet was flipped to the last page, logo facing up. No one had picked it up. No one was looking at it. Chu Huaiqin's speech continued. He advanced the PowerPoint to the next section. The screen displayed two side-by-side molecular structure comparisons. On the left, the genotypes of the Chu Jing No. 1 core parents across 17 SSR molecular marker loci. On the right, the genotypes of Shenong High-Tech's Shen Jing No. 3 at the same loci. The two line graphs were virtually identical, like a shadow that had been copied and pasted. Colleagues, this is the answer DNA gives us. Not my word, not my notebooks, not my memory. Molecular markers. The unalterable genetic information at every single locus. Teacher Yuan Zhongkong once said, "People can lie. Seeds cannot." He clicked to the next slide. It displayed a logo and brief introduction for something called the Seed Guardian Initiative. Clean, simple, without any extra embellishment. Effective today, the Yuan Zhongkong International Trust Fund officially launches the Seed Guardian Initiative. Each year, we will fund 10 young breeders to complete UPOV international variety rights filings, with all costs covered by the fund. The purpose of this initiative is not because I won. It is because I never want another breeder, after spending 6 years crouching on the ridges of rice paddies, to have to kneel on the steps of an administration building and watch their manuscripts be burned. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. In the front row, one of the old experts removed his glasses and wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand. The young breeders in the back rows were unervingly still. A few had notebooks open, but their pens weren't moving. This is my promise to my teacher. The applause came again. This time, no one remained seated. After the forum, Chen Hanqi was waiting for him outside the venue. The old man was holding the portable liquid nitrogen dewar, his silver hair a little disheveled by the wind. Beside him stood old Pan, wearing a faded blue work jacket, utterly out of place among the suited attendees around him, but he was grinning from ear to ear. Chu Huaiqin walked up to them. Chen Hanqi handed him the dewar. Returning the original stock. I guarded it for you for 3 years. Not a single grain lost. Now it goes back to its rightful owner. Chu Huaiqin took the dewar with both hands. The metal was icy cold, the sensation traveling from his palms to his fingertips. He looked down at the seal of the Academy's germplasm repository on the dewar. The date on the seal was 3 years ago. 3 years. In those 3 years, this batch of seeds had slept in liquid nitrogen at -196 degrees Celsius for over 1,000 days and nights. Their owner had knelt on the steps of an administration building watching his manuscripts burn to ash, had hauled 50 gene sacks in a market for 2 yuan a load, had crouched in a shantytown room coaxing seedlings to life in the dying warmth of a coal stove. Now they were waking up. Their owner was bringing them home. 2 months later, Chu Huaiqin's doctoral dissertation defense was reconvened. The defense venue was the same as before. The largest lecture hall in the College of Agriculture at Zhongbei Agricultural University, its windows facing the experimental fields. Jiang Foran, who had once stood on this very stage and announced Chu Huaiqin's punishment for academic fraud, was no longer on the podium. Today, the chairman of the defense committee was Chen Hanqi. Among the 5 committee members, 3 had been the original external reviewers of the dissertation, 1 was the chief rice breeding scientist from the provincial academy, and 1 had traveled specifically from the capital, the deputy director of the National Variety Certification Committee. The defense proceeded smoothly. Chu Huiqin's PowerPoint contained not a single word of fluff. Every data point was annotated with the archive number of the original records. Every field photo carried a time and GPS watermark. Every gel image for molecular markers was accompanied by an independent third-party replication verification report. The committee members asked several sharp questions about whether the segregation ratio of a rare allele in the F6 population conformed to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, whether the interaction of 3 years of multi-location yield data across different ecological zones reached a significance level, and how the phenotypic contribution rate of a distant wild rice introgress gene segment in the parent pedigree was calculated. Chu Huiqin answered every question, each answer precise to 2 decimal places. He wasn't reciting answers from memory. He was recalling every piece of data he had seen with his own eyes and measured with his own hands. An hour later, the defense committee withdrew for a closed-door deliberation. Chen Hanqi called the other 4 members into a small conference room next door and shut the door. In the hallway outside, Chu Huiqin sat alone on a bench. Next to him was a thermos of honeysuckle tea his mother had sent from their hometown. He didn't drink it. He just held the cup, feeling its warmth seep through the walls and into his palms. 20 minutes later, the door opened. Chen Hanqi walked out, holding a piece of paper. He unfolded it and read the defense resolution aloud. His voice was old and resonant, every word sounding like it had been waiting for a very long time. The defense committee unanimously finds that Comrade Chu Huiqin's doctoral dissertation, Molecular Marker-Assisted Selection of Core Parents and High-Yield Mechanism of the Superhybrid Rice Chu Jing No. 1, contains rigorous and comprehensive data, sound logic, and outstanding innovation. It holds significant theoretical value and practical guidance for the field of molecular breeding in Indica japonica hybrid rice, reaching the leading level for a doctoral dissertation. The Defense Committee unanimously approves the dissertation defense and recommends the conferral of the Doctor of Agriculture degree. He removed his reading glasses, folded the temples, and placed them in his breast pocket. Then he extended his hand, the hand that had done molecular marker experiments under a microscope for 40 years, and patted Chu Huiqin on the shoulder. Xiao Chu, your student status is formally reinstated as of today. This classroom, this building, these experimental fields, you can come back now. He paused, and a flicker of something others might not have noticed crept into his voice. Welcome back to the team. Your teacher Yuan, watching from above, will be happy too. Chu Huiqin stood and bowed to the defense committee. Then he turned and bowed toward the empty back rows of the lecture hall. No one was sitting there, but in his heart Yuan Zhongkong was. Sitting in the same spot he had sat during Chu Huiqin's first national high-yield competition defense, wearing that ill-fitting suit, grinning harder than if he'd won the award himself. 3 days later, Chu Huiqin went to Chen Hanqi's experimental station. The station was located in a stretch of hilly land on the border of Jiangbei and the neighboring province, covering nearly 2,000 mu, the largest rice breeding base of the Academy of Agricultural Sciences Institute of Crop Sciences. Chen Hanqi had saved him the best plot. Near the water source, flat terrain, even soil fertility. A row of simple prefab buildings had been newly erected by the field, with water, electricity, and basic lab equipment. This is your independent lab, Chen Hanqi said. Name it yourself. Chu Huiqin stood on the field ridge, looking out at the land that would be tilled and planted after the spring thaw. The field was still covered with overwintering Chinese milk vetch, its tender green leaves shimmering faintly under the winter sun. Milk vetch was a green manure. Plowed under, it would add organic matter to the soil and provide natural basal fertilizer for next year's rice. This was something Yuan Zhongkong had taught him. A good breeder doesn't just look at the seedlings, he looks at the soil beneath them. He pulled from his canvas satchel the bag of landrace chive seeds old Pan had given him. Dark brown, tiny as crushed tea leaves. He crouched down on a small open patch by the field ridge, poked a few holes in the soil with his finger, dropped 2 seeds in each, gently covered them and watered them. Su Nianqing crouched beside him, tilting her head to watch him plant. She wore a navy blue cotton dress today and a pair of mud-splattered sneakers, holding a handful of scallions she had just picked from the station's vegetable garden. She had told Chu Huiqin she would come help plant the chives, but in truth she hadn't helped at all. just crouched there watching. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it. They'll sprout next spring. By summer you can cut the first harvest. Chives are perennials. Plant them once and you can keep cutting them for years." Chu Huaiqin smoothed the soil and stood up, looking at the bare patch next to Old Pan's chives. "I'll plant another patch next to it. I'll use a wild chive I transplanted from the hills near Old Pan's hometown as a parent. Try crossing it with his landrace and see what happens." Su Nianqing stood, brushing the dirt off her skirt. The sunset washed the entire experimental field in a soft tangerine glow. Chu Huaiqin stood on the ridge, still holding a few unplanted chive seeds in his palm. He lifted his head and gazed at the distant horizon. He suddenly remembered a dusk many years ago at the southern breeding base in Hainan. Yuan Zhongkong had sat on the field ridge, pointing at the rice in full bloom before them, and said something he hadn't fully understood at the time. He understood it now. "Su, my teacher once said, a single seed can change the world. But first you have to keep that seed alive. That seed survived today not because of me alone. It survived because of the path he laid down in the international legal framework, because Professor Chun spent 3 years guarding those seeds for me, because you helped me defend the last line of the variety rights in court. Because of so many people." He looked down at the chive seeds in his hand. "So I need to live a few more years. Finish what needs to be done. Repay the debts that need repaying." He tucked the remaining chive seeds into his pocket and turned to walk toward the prefab building. His silhouette was lean and straight, stretched long by the sunset glow. When spring came, the first crop of overwintering milk vetch was plowed under, and the soil gave off the damp, rich scent of earth. Chu Huaiqin and his team sowed a new season of Chujing No. 1 in the experimental field, along with over a dozen new hybrid F1 crosses. Old Pan's landrace chives sprouted too, their delicate leaves pushing through the soil, a vivid gleaming green. The patch beside them, reserved for the wild chives, was also tilled and ready, waiting only for autumn to transplant from the mountains. By midsummer, the first cohort of 10 young breeders for the Seed Guardian Initiative was formally announced. The list included a graduate student working on drought-resistant wheat in the arid Northwest, an agricultural technician protecting local maize landraces in the southwestern mountains, and a doctoral candidate breeding high-oil soybean varieties on the black soils of the Northeast. Each had a different research focus, but they all shared one thing. They were all under 35, all using the most painstaking fundamental methods to do their breeding work, and all had previously suffered setbacks in protecting their variety rights due to lack of funding and legal support. At the launch ceremony, Chu Huaiqin said only one thing. "Teacher Yuan helped me back then not because I was exceptional. It was because he believed that the dumb, grueling effort of young people deserves to be protected. Now it's my turn to do the same." By the autumn of the following year, the cumulative planting area of Chujing No. 1, across the middle and lower Yangtze rice-growing region had surpassed 30 million mu. At an average yield increase of 120 kilograms per mu, those 30 million mu produced an extra 3.6 million tons of grain. 3.6 million tons. Enough to feed 10 million people for a full year. At that year's National Seed Industry Conference, the director of the Seed Industry Management Division of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs specifically mentioned Chujing No. 1 in his keynote address, listing it as one of the most representative independent innovation achievements since the launch of the Seed Industry Revitalization Action Plan. Chu Huaiqin sat in the audience, the rice panicle hexagon badge pinned over his chest. Su Nianqing sat beside him, reviewing the application materials for the second cohort of the Seed Guardian Initiative on her tablet. She leaned over and whispered, "This cohort has someone doing highland barley. The application materials are incredibly solid. But the English forms for the UPOV filing aren't finished yet. You'll need to find time to help him with that." Chu Huaiqin nodded, took the tablet, flipped through it, and made a few annotations on the technical questions the applicant had circled in red. On stage, the white-haired director was speaking to the hundreds of seed industry colleagues in the room. The success of Chujing No. 1 is not only the success of a single variety, it is the success of an entire path. It proves that our young breeders are fully capable of defending their rights under international rules, fully capable of proving their value on the international stage with solid, irrefutable data. Chu Huaiqin lowered his head and gently brushed his thumb over the badge on his chest. The rice panicles on the badge gleamed with a muted gold under the conference lights. Every grain was tiny, but every grain was solid. The line of small text on the back pressed against his fingertip. The revitalization of the seed industry does not require that the credit be mine. He remembered Yuan Zhongkong pausing after saying that line, then adding the second half. But the accomplishment will certainly include me. Include you. Include all of you. After the conference ended that evening, he went to the experimental field alone. The sunset was perfect, dyeing the entire field a brilliant gold red. The rice was in the grain-filling stage, heavy panicles bowing their heads. The evening breeze brushed through them, making a soft rustling sound, like countless seeds whispering to each other. He crouched on the ridge and gently lifted one panicle with his fingers, counting the grains. 237. That was 12 grains more than the theoretical grain number of the parent. Those 12 grains came from an unexpected additive effect during the introgression of a lodging resistance gene. He hadn't named this newly discovered additive effect yet, but he had already marked it in his field notebook. Q001. He Chu Huaiqin. This was the first quantitative trait locus he had discovered entirely on his own. There would be a second, a third. Many more. He stood, pulled out his phone and called Sun Yanqing. Where are you? At the office. Just finished reviewing a batch of trademark registration documents for your Seed Guardian Initiative kids. Those kids are geniuses at breeding, but legal paperwork gives every single one of them a headache. Sun Yanqing laughed on the other end. What about you? Still in the field? Yeah, there's something I want to run by you. I want to set up a new dedicated fund under the trust, specifically for landrace conservation. That bag of chives old Pan gave me, I ran it through the germplasm database. It's a local variety on the verge of extinction. There's no telling how many landraces like this are still out there across the country, sitting in farmers' hands, unregistered, unprotected, liable to vanish any day. There was a pause on the line. Then Sun Yanqing said, What do you want to call it? The Seed Return Initiative. All right. I'll start drafting the proposal tomorrow. Chu Huaiqin hung up and tucked his phone into the canvas satchel on the ridge. He crouched down and gently brushed his hand over a row of grain-filling panicles. The heavy heads of rice swayed. His canvas satchel had been with him for years, its corners worn white, the strap broken once and mended by Sun Yanqing with needle and thread, the stitches fine and neat. He pulled a battered enamel mug from the bag, filled it with water from the spigot at the edge of the field, and sat on the ridge, drinking slowly. That autumn, the camellias along the edges of the experimental field bloomed in a brilliant swath of red across the hillside. Sun Yanqing accompanied Chu Huaiqin back to his hometown in Bashu to visit his mother. The old woman's health was much better than in previous years. She could now walk around the courtyard with a cane. She wore a deep red padded jacket and sat in a bamboo chair in the yard. A thick wool blanket Chu Huaiqin had brought from Jiangbei draped over her lap. Sun Yanqing crouched beside her, helping her shell peanuts, listening to her tell stories of Chu Huaiqin as a child, how at 5 he followed her into the fields to glean fallen rice ears, how at 8 he could raise his own seedlings, how at 12 he used his New Year's money to buy half a gene of hybrid rice seed and turned the family vegetable plot into an experimental field, only to have the neighbor's rooster trample half of it. He had chased that rooster across 3 field ridges, crying the whole way. Sun Yanqing laughed until tears streamed down her face. Chu Huaiqin sat nearby, tracing a rice pedigree chart in the dirt with a stick, pretending not to hear. At dusk, Chu Huaiqin walked alone to the edge of the yard. On the hillside beyond the fence, the seeds of Huaizhong rice he had scattered the previous year had grown into a lush, green expanse of seedlings. The tillering was even, the plant architecture compact, the vigor visibly better than the conventional varieties at the foot of the hill. In a few months, these seedlings would head, flower, and set the first generation of seeds. He crouched down, parted the leaves, and checked the tillering nodes at the base of the stems. 3 or 4 new tiller buds were already pushing out. The growth was even better than he had expected. His mother called to him from the courtyard to come in for dinner. He stood, brushed the dirt from his knees and started back. Halfway there, he stopped and turned to look at the seedlings again. They swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if waving to him. He remembered something his mother had taught him as a child. When the rice bows its head, it's almost ripe. He thought that wasn't quite right. When the rice bows its head, it isn't almost ripe. It's almost home. Back where it belongs, into the pot on the stove, into a child's bowl, and into the seedling trays for the coming spring. The following spring, the camellias at the edge of the experimental field sprouted new buds again. Su Nianqing stood on the field ridge, looking out at the vast expanse of freshly tilled black soil. She suddenly turned to Chu Huaiqin and asked, "How long are you planning to work this field?" Chu Huaiqin was crouched on the ridge, holding a single seed in his fingers, gazing at the newly plowed earth before him. He said something that Su Nianqing would not forget for many years. "Until I can't walk anymore. And when that day comes, the young people in the Seed Guardian initiative will carry it on. They have more drive than me, and they know more than I do. Farming was never meant to be finished in a single generation." He placed that seed into one of the cells of the seedling tray and pressed it gently with his finger. The soil was loose and soft, carrying the damp, fresh smell of morning dew. In the distance, the water in the irrigation canal ran on with a soft, ceaseless murmur, like a song that would never end.